Here's yet another example that I think highlights why it is that people think we have a two-tier justice system in this country. It may not be a good thing that people think that, but this is one example of why people think that. Now, this guy, Catalin Gansu, in an unprovoked attack upon multiple people, including a young girl, was sentenced to 1 year and 7 months, so 19 months in prison. And when you compare and contrast that, because I need to buy a little time before I tell you the story, because YouTube will limit the video otherwise, compare and contrast that with Lucy Connolly, who was charged with inciting racial hatred. So she didn't go anywhere, she didn't physically do anything, she just made one tweet and then deleted it later, albeit she pleaded guilty, but I've talked about that in other videos. She received 31 months in prison without physically going and doing anything. Now, with sufficient time passed, I can tell you the story of what happened in this case. So this guy is described by the police as a violent thug who's been jailed for attacking a woman and a 6-year-old girl in a busy Peterborough street. In broad daylight, a completely unprovoked attack. Catalin ran towards the girl and kicked her in the head, knocking her to the ground. Oddly enough, he then helped the child up before running away. Now, whilst that's a little bit odd at the very least, it is something towards mitigation, believe it or not. He helped the victim up afterwards. All a little bit strange, but nonetheless, it didn't detract from the fact that it was an unprovoked attack and he was charged with ABH. A woman who was nearby spotted Gansu waving his arms around, so offered to get him some water from a shop. He followed her into the shop and punched her in the face before running away. Police arrived and he punched one of the officers in the stomach and then went on to cause damage inside of the police van, so he was charged with criminal damage as well. On Wednesday, the 16th of July, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of ABH. I'll come back to the sentencing guidelines in a moment because this is something I have a little bit of a beef with, so I'll tell you about those again in a second. And 1 count of beating an emergency worker and 1 count of criminal damage. So all of those, I presume whatever the sentences were, are running concurrently together rather than consecutively, one after another, or that might be the case, I don't know, I haven't seen the sentencing remarks. But in total was jailed for 1 year and 7 months. Now, the DC that was investigating said this was a horrific series of unprovoked attacks by Gansu, and I have no doubt that his actions will have a lasting impact on his victims. He is clearly a very dangerous man, with no respect for other people or the law. Gansu caused minor injuries to all 3 victims, and the 6-year-old girl had to be taken to hospital to be checked over. And I will add to that, doubtless will have some level of fear for the rest of her life by being attacked, unprovoked, in the street with other people around, and will carry that memory, no doubt, for the rest of her life. I mean, if some of you have got some memory of something that happened when you were 4, 5, 6 years old, I'm sure you remember that. If you've been injured, if you've been attacked or chased or whatever, you'll probably remember that, and I think she will as well. The DC went on to say, violence like this is inexcusable, especially towards a young child, so I'm pleased he's now behind bars. But again, comparing that to Lucy Connolly, who received 31 months in prison when she didn't actually physically go anywhere or do anything. Now, I'm not detracting from what she said in the tweet and that it was wrong. Now, some people still don't think it was wrong. Some people will still make the argument, and I still think she should have pleaded not guilty, and the argument could well have been that she didn't really intend or incite, but I can't really make that argument now because she's signed the declaration that this is what she intended. Whether that was the advice she was given or not, I don't know. I don't know what the advice she was given. But let's take a look at the sentencing guidelines, because this is where I do have a bit of a beef with these things. So bearing in mind this is someone who has physically kicked a 6-year-old girl in the head in an unprovoked attack, then went on to punch a lady, then went on to punch a police officer in the stomach, then caused damage inside the police van, And so let's take a look at the sentencing guidelines and look how the system, as I've talked about in other videos, is winding up with these sentences that to a lot of people I can understand doesn't make sense. So let's start with the inciting racial hatred, which is what the offence that Lucy Connolly was charged with and pleaded guilty to be fair, to be completely clear about it. So inciting racial hatred offences, etc. Now, obviously, these are horrendous offences. Obviously, they do need to be taken seriously. I am not for a moment suggesting these need to be tapered down necessarily, because where it is justified to prosecute somebody, this is a serious offence. It's an either way offence, maximum of 7 years in prison, with an offence range which includes right down to a community order, which is unpaid work, volunteer work, and non-custodial sentence. We go through the level of harm and culpability, and we arrive at this table. So for the most serious, the starting point is 3 years. And for the least serious, a category 2C, a low-level community order up to 1 year custody is the range generally available to the court. And so then it goes through community orders, custodial sentences, and so on. It goes through a list of aggravating factors, mitigating factors. But then let's take a look at the ABH sentencing guidelines here. So assault occasioning actual bodily harm, commonly known as an ABH or a Section 47 offence. Section 47 of the Offenders Against the Person Act 1861. Very old law, but it's been updated since, and still good law. I mean, if you assault somebody and cause actual harm, this is, more than just reddening and soreness to the skin or something like that. You cause an actual harm, and that it can include psychological harm. This can be an ABH. And so a Section 47, maximum 5 years in custody, so not as high a maximum. And then we come, again, determining culpability and harm. We come down to the table. The most serious of offence here, a category 1A, as in the most harm, the most culpability. The starting point here is 2.5 years. So as a reminder to contrast that with inciting racial hatred, where no one has physically hit anybody or done anything physical, the starting point is 3 years. Now, if someone is genuinely, seriously inciting racial hatred, etc., then obviously there are many cases that will justify a category 1A in the starting point here and so on. So the argument is not necessarily against that, but it is really, where do we place offenders like this one that I'm talking about in this video on this chart here to end up with several charges? A reminder of those charges: he kicked the 6-year-old girl in the head, then followed a woman into a shop and punched her in the face. Then when the police officer arrived, punched her in the stomach, and then went on to cause damage inside the police van by repeatedly kicking it. So all of those combined together, obviously the criminal damage aspect is a separate sentencing guideline, but all of those culminated in a 1 year and 7 months sentence. Now, obviously, jailed for 1 year and 7 months, I presume that was the total sentence, and in fact will serve half before being released on license. Now, let me know what you think in the comments below, because there may be split views on this, or most people might think the same thing. But certainly the feedback that I tend to get and the general feeling that I get in the comments is that people think that if we are going to jail someone like Lucy Connolly, who pleaded guilty to 31 months in prison for a tweet that was inciting racial hatred, which I obviously don't condone, then when we get a violent thug like this, who in an unprovoked attack attacks many people, including those very young and police officers, and causing damage to the police van, and one of the attacks being a kick in the head to a young child, which luckily appears to have only caused minor injuries, could easily, very, very easily, have killed the girl, either by the force of the kick itself, if it caught at the right angle and so on, or if she fell, which she did, and hit her head in a certain way and caused a much more serious injury, she could well have died from those injuries. Perhaps we should absolutely be levying the most serious sentences against such violent individuals who are physically and actually going out and attacking people. So on the one hand, we have people posting tweets, which they very quickly delete, albeit they plead guilty, to inciting racial hatred, which is obviously a bad thing. But if they are going to prison for such a lengthy period of time, 31 months in Lucy Connolly's case, the case most people are familiar with, then we should absolutely be levying the most serious sentences against these individuals. Again, let me know what you think. There may be a split opinion on this, or most people might think the same thing. But either way, leave me your sensible thoughts and comments in the box below. Please do subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.